G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Lindsay McMahon from All Ears English. She's based in Denver, Colorado in the United States. Thanks for your time today, Lindsay.
Thanks, Troy, for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Let's start with how we know each other. You've got a podcast, which we'll talk about in a moment, and we both use the Podmatch platform. So you reached out and I thought you'd be a great guest to have on.
Yes, I'm excited. I love, after almost 10 years with this company, All Ears English, I'm excited to kind of reflect on what we've done and help other people getting started or growing their show or their podcast. So, yes.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
So All Ears English is a platform for global professionals who need English for their careers. So that, for example, that could be someone in Japan who is affiliated with the New York office of their company and they have to have conference calls in English. It's a high pressure situation. Or someone that has moved, let's say from Brazil to Canada and is working full time in English. That's who our target audience and listener is.
Oh, fantastic. How did you start out?
Oh man, I started out traveling the world and teaching English as a second language. So doing exactly the same thing, just in person. I lived in Japan. I traveled through South America for a year and I got a sense of this industry. It's a gigantic industry. If you think about all the people around the world that need to learn English and then the ones that need that for business, English being the international language of business, I got a taste of what was being done well and what could be improved on. So that's how I started.
And so you started the business in 2012?
2013 is when we launched the podcast, and then the business kind of built itself around the podcast, or we built it around the podcast, around 2013, 14.
And how old were you then when you started the business?
I guess I was 31, 32.
Yep, great. Do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the last 9 years?
Sure. Yeah. So in the beginning, we saw more growth, I'd say more towards 2016, 17, 18. So our first year, 2016 to 17, once we got above those six figures, we started growing fast. We grew at 50% in the top line revenue, and then 25%, 15, 20%, 12%. And now as we're starting to kind of move into a post-pandemic world, things are changing. We've hit some real challenges that I'm noticing when I look at my P&L reviewing 2022. It may be for us the first year we haven't necessarily seen top line revenue growth. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a new thing for me. And so now what I have to do is pivot and I have to adapt to this new post-pandemic world. So I'm excited to talk about that too, if you want to.
Yeah, please jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can go into it as we move through your outline here, Troy, but I think the key point is for your listeners, you can't rest on your laurels. You can't launch a product as we did in 2016 when we launched our first online course where we saw that 50% revenue growth in 2016. That was due to our online course, right? Because we were already small, we got a little bigger, right? But at this point in 2022, pretty much everyone has an online course in my industry. And a lot of people are just one-person influencer companies. So the landscape has completely changed. So at this point, what we're looking to do is continue with online courses, but pivot into a media model. So we're forging partnerships with brands to add advertising onto our show so that we're able to continue to create awesome episodes for our listeners and have a huge listener base as we move the company into the 2020s.
Yeah, great. Are you happy to share what your monthly downloads are?
Yes, our monthly downloads. Well, we've got 3 podcasts. So the biggest show by far is All Ears English, and that does 8 million monthly global downloads. So
Wow.
it's a really big show. It's grown gradually too, right? In this industry, I've never seen any kind of hockey stick growth. That must be in the tech industry, and that's okay with me. I'm okay with gradual growth because then you're building a foundation. that you can actually lean on. In the moments when you don't see that growth, you've built a foundation, then you pivot. So All Ears English has grown gradually. It's got about 8 million downloads. And then IELTS Energy Podcast, which is our second show, does around 1 million downloads a month. And that one is focused on an exam that our listeners have to take if they want to immigrate to an English-speaking country. It's called the IELTS exam, International English. So if they want to go to New Zealand, your country, for example, Troy, they need to take this exam.
Yep. Right. And what's the third podcast?
The third podcast is called Business English. So this one is kind of an offshoot of All Ears English. We've curated just our business-oriented episodes, put them in a new show so that people know exactly what they're going to get when they come into that podcast.
Yeah, great. And what about number of full-time equivalents you started with in 2013 and how many you're at now?
Well, to be honest, I mean, our show was started as two co-founders, co-hosts of the podcast. We plugged in a microphone. It was a very organic way of a business to start. I reached out to another teacher in Boston who I knew had her own business teaching ESL. And I had, at that time, another company that was a tutoring contracting company for teaching one-on-one English lessons to professionals in Boston. And I called her up. I said, hey, would you like to start a podcast? She said, okay, cool. And we just plugged in the microphone and got started. So I guess at that time there were 0 or 2 full-time equivalents. At this point, our team we've got a staff of 8. They're not all full-time. No one is full-time except for me. But my staff, 3 of us, 3 of them are on the payroll, including myself. But we do provide benefits. And so we do try to treat it with the benefits of a large company while being a very small company.
Great.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So would you say full-time equivalent now is 5 or 6?
Yeah, I'd say, I'm not sure how you exactly define full-time equivalent, but like I said, support staff total is 8. And then the team who are on the payroll, they're not full-time, but there are 3 of them. So yeah.
Full-time equivalent is total hours worked in a week across the business divided by 40 gives you roughly full-time equivalents.
Okay. I don't have that math for you, but what I can tell you is that they're working every day on a daily basis. They work, they work hard for me. They're motivated. This is their main job. They don't really do anything else. And so I'm lucky to have a good team.
And so you had a business before this one. That was your business,
yes.
Right? And was that just yourself, or you had some other team members on that?
That was a company where it started off as me in New York City, training professionals after work, one-on-one in cafes and libraries around improving their business communication skills. And then when I left and moved to Boston, I hired contractors. So it was a contracting company, consulting company. I'd hire them to work with those students that came through our website so they could have that service, right? That very targeted service just for their needs.
Yep. And what did you end up doing with that business?
That business has just kind of faded away, to be honest. The website is still live. The blog, I spent a lot of time blogging in 2010. And it really wasn't very hard to see organic growth in the website. If you did the right things on the blog, you really could grow your blog at that time, which was great. That was motivating for me. But now at this time, I'm much more interested in building a scalable business. That's why when we talk about full-time equivalent, it doesn't resonate with me as much, just because my goal is to build a small team and reach a huge number of people and build that scale in the business, right? So I'm not paying an army of 80 employees. That's not my goal.
Yep.
Yeah.
When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
Oh my gosh. Probably the first moment was that online course launch in 2016, the very first online course. Because, sometimes we can get into a pattern of, I don't know how to do this, so I'm going to do it later. That can happen to all of us. So what I did was I bought a course on how to launch an online course.
Is that Jeff Walker's product launch formula?
No, it was actually David Siteman Garland, but very similar kind of guy, like same idea, same generation, let's say, of course creators, the original generation that taught all of us how to create our courses, right? Took the course, I followed it step by step. I had hired one of my employees who was an expert in this exam. So that was one of the smarter things I did early on, to hire someone that had very different skill sets than me. I still don't do IELTS, this exam. Jessica and Aubrey are on that podcast, the other podcast, entirely on their own. So they brought that expertise into the business. And because Jessica came on with the IELTS expertise, all I had to do was learn how to build the course and set up the marketing. And we launched the course within 6 months, right? So immediate value added to the business.
Great. So that was the moment the launch obviously clearly went
Yeah,
well.
I think the launch. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
not like it was, $1 million launch as these guys would tell you it would
Yeah.
be. No, of course not. Of course not. I don't think that happens to really anyone, to be honest. But it was a launch, right? We had a handful of new students. I was excited. I had it out there, and it's been generating revenue since then, right? That's the point. We don't have to remake the course. We update the course once a year based on consulting with examiners. We know what's going on with the exam, but we don't need to remake this thing. We don't need to produce the machine, as the product inside a factory again and again. That's a scalable business. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned before we hit record, we have an online training business called the Distillers Institute. Anyone thinking of starting a distillery here in Australia, we launched that 2.5 years ago. We've got 440 students in those 2 courses, and it's just great. We update the courses like you about once a year when things change, and it's just set and forget sits there. Obviously, we need to do marketing, but a bit of customer support. But yeah, it's a great business model.
Exactly. I mean, that's the reason we don't necessarily need a huge payroll, and we can hire conservatively and pay well, right? So that we can make sure our teams have the skills, but we don't need to fill our offices up with workers.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
What does success look like to you?
What does success look like? I think a couple of things. Number one, my team's happy, right? So I love the fact that they can get up and they can say, I get to do this every day, right? I get to podcast about English as a second language. I get to motivate students. The fact that they can feel that way and I can feel that way, that is success, I would say for sure. And then I would say our success in terms of our listeners. When I receive an email from a listener who's been impacted by an episode, that's total success. That's amazing, right? That's so much more powerful than revenue growth. But to be honest, my human mind goes to the revenue and thinks, oh my God, we're not going to grow this year. This is a problem. I should spend more time being grateful for those emails that I get from my listeners, right? It's a good reminder. So we have that endurance to keep going as business owners.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
I would say, as we said before we hit record here, Troy, I would say what we need to do here is come up with something a reason why you started your business, figure out what that is, and then put that into words. Find kind of, I don't want to say a slogan because it sounds too trite, right? It sounds too corporate, but a little catchy phrase that encompasses that and say it everywhere. If you have a podcast, say it on your podcast, in your email marketing, in your courses. Make sure your audience knows what you stand for in your market. An example of this, our phrase or our belief, our value is connection, not perfection. We actually trademarked that phrase. Trademarking is a great recommendation. It's pretty cheap in the US, about $2,000 to trademark a phrase. It protects your business. And now in my industry, our listeners know that that is our thing. Right? Yep. That is why we teach English. And when they think of that, they think of us. And it actually truly resonates because we can go to something so much deeper than grammar mistakes, vocabulary. There is something deeper, and that's human connection.
Yes.
That's why we learn languages. So for your listeners, that's what you have to be doing. These marketing tactics change every year. TikTok is hot now. Next year, it'll be something else. Maybe not. Quizzes, yes, no. Email funnels. We could talk about them all day if you want. But I think the real key is having a foundation, a reason that your business exists.
Yeah. Yeah, then that resonates with people. I'm really surprised you were able to trademark that. Did it take very long?
No, it really did. I mean, no, absolutely not. So you obviously have to hire a trademark lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer, someone that knows how to do this. There's a period in which you have to apply for the trademark, and then I think there's a 3-year waiting period, and then you pass another step, and then it's officially your trademark. So there is like a step-by-step process. There's a waiting period you have to go through, I would say. So there's a little bit of time.
Speaking of trademark lawyers, I'm pretty sure Devin Miller is based in Denver, Colorado, where you are. I had him on episode 48.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
How did you fund the business?
How did I fund it? Oh, this is a bootstrapped business. So this is not a business where we've taken any kind of capital investment. It's not something I have ever considered seriously. I would consider it if I were approached, but then at that point you do lose a lot of control. So I've always been in the habit of reinvesting profits, right? One thing that we've done to differentiate ourselves from other creators that may be running a smaller game is that we've built some strong technology over the years. We have an iOS and an Android app. It's cost me probably a couple $100,000 just to build both apps, but it's able to generate revenue, recurring revenue, membership revenue, month after month after month. It's steady and it's scalable. So we did that, and we also built an Alexa skill to try to hedge on the future of audio consumption. So we bootstrapped it, and we tend to reinvest our profits into technology as much as we can without being a full-on tech platform, right?
And so no other investors along the way. It's just you and your business partner.
Yeah, it really is. So, right. So and I'm sure we'll get to this a little bit later when we talk about kind of mistakes and that kind of thing. My initial business partner ended up leaving the business after about 9 months, and I took the business over on my own. So it's been me since then, basically since the beginning. And yes, I've just been reinvesting. And so far with, these margins with these kinds of companies the math ends up working as long as you don't make too many mistakes.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no, right? There's never a clear answer. I could tell you why I may not. The reason is that it is getting a lot more competitive. Because there's a low barrier to entry in my market. If you think about it, anyone who can speak English as their first language or even as their second language can become an online English teacher or English influencer. Granted, you say that, but it's a lot harder to set up an actual business. The hours, Troy, the days and hours and time you spend thinking about your business, that's a different thing. But I would say it is getting a lot more crowded, this market. So if you did go into it, you would have to be on the front edges of it. Like, where is this market going? Being on the innovation side. For example, that's why we're building our Alexa skill. When audio consumption, podcast consumption really moves over to car, opening your refrigerator and asking for a podcast, that kind of thing will be ready, will be there. You have to do a little something extra to compete in this market. And the reason I would stay in it and go into it as a newbie is that it's a huge market. So it's not a tiny, tiny market in one state, in one country. It's a gigantic market. If you think about the number of people that need English in their daily lives or their work, it's absolutely humongous. So it's a yes and a no.
Yeah. Yeah, back on the Alexa, I haven't had a look at any of this stuff, but I have seen stats showing that the voice search, for example, is growing massively. People are, using not just their mobile for more and more searches and browsing, but also just voice commands, to Google things.
Yeah, I think, I've seen mixed data. I've seen data that says it's not growing as fast as they had hoped, and other data that's saying like Alexa just needs to help people teach people what to do with this skill. People will get the skill in their house and they'll ask for the weather, the news, they don't know what else to do. So once we as a society become aware of what we can do with Alexa or the equivalent Siri, we'll be ready as a company. We'll be there on the front line, already offering bundles of quizzes to upskill your listening, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Sure. So this probably ties into what I briefly mentioned before. So as I said, our company was founded in 2013, and we started the podcast together, and the company built around it gradually. But at that time, it was really just the podcast with my co-host, because one of the differentiators that made us successful in the beginning was having two of us, right, back and forth. A lot of, in my industry, what it is one person speaking. And when you think about learning a language, it's usually not just you listening to one person. It's usually you listening to two people and wanting to be in connection with two people. Okay. So that differentiated us, and we needed to have two people on the show. But the mistake we made, this leads into the biggest mistake, was we never talked about what would happen if one person would eventually want to leave. And of course that happened. I think a lot of us make this classic mistake.
Been there.
Maybe you have too, Troy. I don't know. We do. We make this mistake because we're so excited. We have a nice rapport with our business partner. We're building something that's catching on, and it's an awkward conversation to have, right? So there was never even like a back of the napkin agreement. And that was my biggest mistake and my most stressful moment, when I had to say, okay, what's going to happen here? In my gut, I knew there was something special with this brand. Something we were building here was different, was special. It felt like play to me when I was behind the microphone, very different from that original tutoring company I had, which felt more administrative for me.
Yep.
Um, and so that was it. That was making the decision to continue on, going through all of that, and then hiring my team. And they're actually still here with me today on my team. My first 2 hires are still with me, which is pretty incredible.
That is great after 9 years. It's a very common mistake, and I've certainly made it several times over. I've been in business now 23 years, is not having a fucking shareholders agreement. Yes. Or even just the first step is obviously having that conversation about expectations of how many hours they want to put in, where the business wants to go, potential exit down the track, and aligning those to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then obviously documenting some of those key things in a shareholders agreement, because the shareholders agreement's there for when shit goes wrong and someone does want to exit. To help you guide through those tricky conversations and just get it done as quickly as possible. Otherwise, even if you were 9 months in, so it may not have been a big financial discussion because the business was so young, but it's still an emotional and time distraction, big time distraction, and takes you away from where generating value in the business.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's, you could say we don't know where this is going, but just putting something down is helpful to open the conversation and have the conversation. So that did create the most stressful time in the business, but it led to me hiring 2 great new coworkers at that time. And then again, building our first real asset generating piece of our first product really was our online course. So at that point, the business still really wasn't making much money at all. It was still just an art project, kind of. It was just a media project in that sense. And we became a business at that point by hiring people, enrolling them, building the course and selling it and actually marketing it. So, yeah.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think the area in which I've seen the biggest returns is leadership. So, joining groups like last year, I was a part of the group Strategic Coach. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a huge network of entrepreneurs in Canada and the US who meet 4 times a year, sometimes online in the case of the pandemic, but often in Chicago. We fly out, have a 2-day mastermind group and seminar, and really just dig into you as the entrepreneur, as the business owner, what's holding you back, a lot about time management. And just some of the things I picked up in that group in terms of how to manage my team, how to inspire them, motivate them, and then bringing them right back into my company. I've seen immediate results. And in terms, let's not say necessarily revenue, but eventually it is more how my team feels, how I can check in with them. Specifically, this is a tool that I was going to mention at the end, but a way to check in with your team. I use 15-5 is I don't know if you've heard of it, Troy. It's a survey tool where it generates questions randomly for them every week. Who's someone on the team you'd like to get to know? What's something you are concerned about, but you don't want to share in a meeting? These are important check-ins where they rate how they're feeling every week. And if we don't do this, we're a remote company. My team is based all over the US. If I don't check in with them through some kind of tool, I could have a surprise the next time we meet, right? So a way of monitoring your team and making sure we're good.
That's good. I like it. Also, it's automated. It's a system.
Exactly. I think they might think that I write those questions, but the system writes those questions for me and they're fine, right? I don't need to go and write the questions and send them. The system does everything. I take literally 5 minutes reading them every week and that's it. So it's great.
What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
I would say it's not natural. Bookkeeping, accounting, P&L work is not natural for me. And I've had to employ family members, my partner for help, people that you're not necessarily on my team. Of course, I've got a good accountant now and that's great. And a bookkeeping system, but just understanding how important that P&L is at the end of the month to know where we're at, the ratio of our indirect and direct expenses, how are we really doing, not how I think we're doing or feel we're doing, has been huge, but it didn't come naturally. Because in my industry, we start these companies because we're teachers or we're trainers, we're coaches. We develop people. We don't live in the book world, the number world. That's been my hardest, biggest lift, I would say.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Like I said, the fact that, my staff they're able to live in their hometowns. They don't have to relocate. They can create their schedule. The fact that we've created for them a job, which allows them to be fulfilled and I feel fulfilled. And then seeing results from our courses is truly amazing, especially for the IELTS course, because that one, if they get their score, they're gone. They're going to Australia. They are going to Canada. They're booking their ticket and their family is coming with them. That's huge. It's also a huge responsibility for us.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I would say for me, it's what I mentioned in the beginning when I realized probably in 2021. It was interesting because I thought that the pandemic was going to be was going to crush us. I thought, oh my gosh, the pandemic's going, no one's going to spend money on online courses. No one's going to listen to podcasts. They're not going to work. I actually saw a boost in 2020, and the reality check came after 2020, more in 2021 and this year, because the market had all of a sudden become much more flooded. So, we're still doing fine and making a margin and we're still doing okay. But my mindset shift has been, hey, we can't rely on online courses. We're not going to be 100% online course business. Just online courses, even outside of English language training, is already becoming very competitive. You probably know that, Troy. And so adding a media model revenue stream to my company is going to be key. So working with brands, becoming kind of thinking of ourselves as just as much influencers as we are course creators or educators. That's been the shift. And that's where we're heading, to a split model.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Oh man, this is probably not original, but I think it comes back to leadership. You have to think, even though it is so hard, right? You're doing all these things. You're taking care of all, you've got your hand in everything. You still have to spend time thinking about how are you as a leader. Unfortunately, you do, but it pays dividends in the end.
Jump over to growasmallbusiness.com and leave your details to get a short 2-minute email I send on Fridays to help small business owners like you become better leaders. I include some reading or professional development resources I've discovered in the last week.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, being thorough in your interviews is really important. Always asking people to do something. There's like 2 stages of the interview, right? Always have that 2-stage interview where the first one's kind of a screening. Maybe your assistant takes care of it. And the second one, you ask them to complete some kind of a project. For us, we actually had them plan an episode. Since our podcast is the biggest part of our business, plan an episode, bring the episode to me in our next interview. We'll record it together. I'll have my editor edit it and I'll listen to it. And I'll think about it and we'll decide, is this the right person? Because it's just as much having, expertise in our field as it is personality, the ability to keep our listeners excited, engaged, awake, having a clear voice. These things, not everyone has these things, right? The other thing I've struggled with is understanding how to set a pay rate for a position that's not so high that they honestly have nowhere to grow. Right? If you set it too high, there's nowhere you can go beyond that because you've hit your limit for what that should be worth in a company. But if you set it too low, then you don't have enough interest for a position. So where's that sweet spot where you're paying well, but not so well that they're stuck? They're never going to go beyond that. So
what are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'll say it again just because it's so valuable. The 15-5 check-ins are huge. Yeah. So I would recommend for your listeners, if you run even a larger team, a larger company, have this deployed by department. Check out 155.com. One-on-one meetings with my team, each of them as much as I can, to check in and ask those extended questions from those surveys. How are you feeling? What's something that you would like to build, a skill you'd like to build that you haven't been able to so far? Asking those honest questions is great. And then one thing that's kind of cool, because we're a remote team, a lot of our work involves podcasting together as one-on-one. And so people aren't just isolated in their world. So employing as much of that as you can, where people meet up with each other to get the work done because we're sitting in our offices, is good for your team.
And you were remote pretty much from day one?
We've always been remote. This business has never had like a head office other than my home office. So,
And your one-on-ones, you do them weekly, monthly, or quarterly?
We try to do them quarterly. Yeah, weekly would be an overkill for us. I do a one-on-one with one member of the team weekly, but that's more of a business planning situation. That's not really about her career. So one-on-ones quarterly, team syncs as well quarterly where I'll report to them, here's how we did, here's what our goals are. So I think that's important for your team to know, where are you going? Where are things going? And there are times when I'm confused. I'm at a point now where I'm like, where are we going? How are we going to make sure that revenue grows between 23 and 24? But you can also be honest and say, this is something that it's a work in progress to your team. It's okay to be a little bit unsure and have your team help you figure things out too.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Balance, it helps that the people in my life pull me away from my computer. So my partner kind of gets me to take those vacations, book those trips, take those days off, take a day to go skiing. We do live in Colorado after all. And why do we live here, right? And also in the strategic coach group, I learned about a framework, which I don't currently use, but I think this could be useful for some of your listeners. Having a framework where you break down your days between free days, focus days, and buffer days. And then also taking more free days. So you want to gradually increase your free days. So beyond just the weekend, maybe you take one extra free day a month, and then you move up to 2 and 3. And the goal is 1/3 of your time outside of weekends being free days. So that's kind of a framework unique to strategic coach, but I think it can be employed by anyone. If you just think your buffer days are your days to tie things together, make sure things are taken care of. Focus days are where you're mostly business development, right? Where you're going out, getting that new business, growing your company. And then the free days are totally free. You're not allowed to touch your laptop.
Yep.
There's no checking in to email. So yeah.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
More and more over the years. So I tend to go to 1 to 2 conferences a year. Usually those are more in the podcasting space because, again, our podcast is a huge deal for us. So especially this year, what I've done over the year, I've shifted my time at these conferences, less going to sessions and more time going meeting people, more time talking to people, setting up meetings. I think it's kind of a rookie mistake to spend all your time going to the sessions, sitting there taking notes, which is something that is easy to do and is lower pressure and is maybe more comfortable. But in the end, you come home and, where are your contacts? So setting up meetings, meeting people, talking, coming home, following up on those contacts is something I've been doing more and more. And I recommend that for sure.
Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
For sure. Yeah. And those have come in a lot of different forms. What I haven't had is someone, say to me, hey, I'd like to be your mentor. I'll meet with you once a month for an hour for eternity. This never happens, right? My point here is, we think that this will happen. This magical person will come along. It's not a thing. At least it hasn't been in my world. So I've filled that gap in different ways by joining executive programs like Strategic Coach, or through mastermind groups. I've done mastermind groups of people outside of my industry and even people in my industry, like direct competitors, meeting with them 4 times a year to actually talk about the industry and sharing what we're doing, which has been, at times it scares me. I'm saying, oh my God, I'm sharing all my secrets here. This is weird. But these are things where we come away learning a lot. I've also filled in the gap with paid help at times. Sometimes if you want to grow a specific skill, it can be really valuable to just say, hey, look, you're so far ahead of me. Let me just pay you for an hour of your time and just teach me everything you know, instead of waiting for that magical mentor to come along. So that's an important takeaway, I think, for your listeners here, from something I've learned around mentorship.
Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
I do not have that. Nope.
Yeah.
So I do, my partner does help me a lot, actually. She does help me in terms of like looking at my company from that high level, analyzing it from a more accounting or bookkeeping or strategic marketing perspective. And just getting anyone's eyes on your business that are not your own. That's kind of my board of directors, let's say.
All right, Lindsay, we want to do a final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
It's definitely deciding what to do next. Oh my gosh. So when you have a small business, there are really no limits. If you have a margin, you have some profit to reinvest, you could go in 25 different directions. Yep. And because we're entrepreneurs, right, we're business owners, we have the energy, we have the ideas. So that's been the hardest thing, deciding what to do and making sure I follow through and focus on that thing. Yep. Because the next day a shiny object comes up and I can't follow it, but I want to. I
couldn't even spell that word focus when I started 23 years ago.
Yeah. Yes. That's just that. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. We wouldn't have started these companies if we weren't that way. But there comes a time when that can become a liability for our companies.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Definitely in the beginning, it was Seth Godin, because I took a lot of his ideas and became inspired by them, or the way I created the podcast, the way our team created it. The Purple Cow, The Icarus Deception, these books have helped me to find inspiration behind creating something different in an industry that the industry maybe had never quite seen before, and being proud. And the idea of, I don't know if you've read anything by Seth Godin, Troy?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know his whole idea of like, this is not for you thing that he always says. That's given me so much solace. You know, when our approach to teaching grammar is probably a little bit different from a grammarian, a stickler, right? I revel in even saying it on my show, like, if this, if you don't like our philosophy of focusing on connection, then this podcast is not for you. There are plenty of other shows out there that are great for you, right? So that's been really helpful from a morale standpoint for me and an energy standpoint as the founder. I also like the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. And when it comes to reminding myself I have to outsource things, I can read that and kind of get into it and say, okay, we need to hire someone for this position. I can't learn everything.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Yeah, I mean, these days I'm paying a lot of attention to the podcasting industry, just because we are looking to launch new podcasts in 2023, 24, 25. That's going to be part of our strategy now, is starting a network, which we should have done a few years ago, but we're going to do now. So I read a lot of industry news. I follow a lot of the newsletters, listen to a lot of the podcasts on how is podcasting developing in Europe, in Asia, what are the trends, who's listening the most. That kind of thing I find very interesting.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I think one thing that's been interesting, a few years ago, I realized that I wanted to be able to provide a 401k for my team, because again, this differentiates us a lot in our industry. Most small businesses in my industry don't really have a staff on payroll. They don't really pay a 401k or PTO. They kind of just contract out help. And I wanted to be a little bit different in that sense, because high quality employees deserve, I think, a 401k and a match. But when I looked around and I thought, oh my God, getting quotes from these larger mutual fund, traditional retirement companies, you end up paying a lot in fees. So I found a company called Guideline. Yeah, I don't know if you know about it, Troy. Have you heard of it? Guideline? Yeah. No. It's just kind of in the breed of the new fintech companies that are trying to offer 401k capabilities to smaller companies like ours. And they offer low-cost funds, Vanguard funds. So you have access to low-cost funds, but you can provide this, and they make it easy, all online, not dealing with spreadsheets that a financial advisor would send you, right? So it's a new generation of how to provide benefits to your company.
Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 9 years ago?
I would say, look, you don't need to know everything from the start, because I have been victim to getting paralyzed. Like, I can't take the next step because I don't know step 10. You're not going to know step 10, and step 10 will probably change, right? So instead of sitting there and mapping out the next year of this whole plan, let's take the next obvious step, and then let's decide after that. Starting to think that way helps me move faster and make better decisions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for your time today, Lindsay. I've really enjoyed our chat. I think the audience get a lot of value out of what you shared with us. Great growth and journey. You're now a team of around 8 after starting with a business partner and parting ways, and wonderful downloads with the podcast, over 10 million per month.
8 million, yes. 8 million downloads.
Well, that's the main one, isn't it?
That's the main one. And then if you put them all together, I suppose it gets to about that level. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Troy.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed our chat.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.